Okay, so again, you're all very welcome to week four, or is it week five? I think it's week four. It's week four, yes, of the What the World Needs Now course. So just to say, I'll just do the usual. So I will share with you what we'll be doing tonight. I'll remind you of what we did last week, and we'll have a short body scan, and then I'll remind you of what the home practice was, and then we'll go into breakout rooms to talk about how we get on. Okay, so in terms of tonight's material, we're going to, yeah, like I say, we're going to begin with the usual recap in discussion groups and so on, with the body scan as well beforehand. So the theme this week, just two themes. One is before the break, one is after the break. We'll look at technology a little bit and its effects. So I want to spend probably more time on this one than the one after the break. The effects that technology has on us, particularly in terms of taking space and having a sense of solitude. And I want to talk a bit about what in Buddhism is called a Bardo. And I think that's a very useful teaching for as an antidote to the technological overload and addictiveness that we tend to experience these days. In the second half, I'm going to look at a bit of conflict in the world, at least briefly, starting off with conflict in the Buddha's time, and then look at six recommended calls to action that a Buddhist can take in terms of really attitudinal shifts one can have towards whatever it is. I mean, it's too big an area to really ever hope to solve in a lifetime, never mind in a 20-minute presentation. So, but we're going to look at a few calls to action. And then, as usual, we'll do the home practice and the questions. See if there's any questions. And we'll go into small groups again. We might go into smaller groups again after we do the technology section. Hopefully before the tea break, just so we have a chance to chat about that ourselves as well. But we'll take that as it comes. In terms of last week, what we did was we looked at the problems facing our environment. So, I talked about the concerns that scientists have, that we have around, all kinds of things. The carbon footprint, carbon emissions, melting ice, and so on and so on. I won't go into them again here. And I talked about important conventional responses to these problems. And I was encouraging you, as part of the home practice, to look at some of those conventional responses. But then we focused in terms of the Buddhist perspective on the five liberations. And these were adaptations of the five ethical guidelines that we have in Buddhism, that are five freedoms that come from not harming life. So when we give up harming life, we experience a great freedom in that. We can experience a great freedom, a great liberation in giving and sharing. We can experience a great freedom from living a simple life, living more simply. We can experience a great freedom from speaking the truth. And we can experience a great freedom from practicing greater awareness and understanding of our own motivations, of where people are coming from, and so on, and what the situation involves. So these are this is the recaps of last week, the problems that we looked at in terms of the environment, and the five liberations that come from that. So the home practice I'll come back to in a moment. But why don't we just sit quietly for a moment or two, and we can just arrive more fully. So setting ourselves up, we can sit very formally in meditation. We can sit very relaxed in whatever slouch you want to sit in, or somewhere in between. So just settling into a sense of sitting here, settling into the sounds we can hear, settling into what we can see through our closed eyes, to what we can taste in our mouths, to what we can smell. Becoming aware of what we can feel in the body, the contact of our body with the chair, with the cushions, and so on. And opening to how the body feels. Are we tired? Are we relaxed? Are we on edge? Are we energized? Opening to the breath in the body. Each in-breath, each out-breath. And just staying with the simplicity of the breath for a few moments. Nothing else to do but simply be with the rise and fall of the rib cage, the expansion and contraction of the stomach, the rise and fall of the breath in the body. And with each out breath, just letting go a bit more into the chair, into the cushions, into the support that we're sitting on. And then broadening out once more to take in the room, the surroundings, the sounds, the people. And when you're ready, you can bring the practice to a close. You can open your eyes once more. Okay. So we'll go into groups in a moment. I think there'll be groups of 4, maybe one of 3. Is that right, Amy?
There's 2 of 3, and there'd be two of 4.
Okay. So you're going to go into a group, aren't you? Or are you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so there will be one. Sorry, there'll only be one of 3. Sorry.
Good. That's grand. Yeah. So just to remind you, the home practice then. So the home practice from last week, coming out of last week, was to have a read of the notes if you want to. There's a lot more information in the notes, and I was reading from quotes and stuff, and the quotes were in the notes. I was encouraging you to see what you can do from the list of more conventional responses. Uh, yeah, there was a whole list of conventional responses, like in terms of reducing your carbon emissions and so on. But really, I was also particularly interested in trying to see if you could consume less, live more simply. And that would tie in very much to what we looked at the previous week as well, in terms of consumerism and the joy of living simply rather than always acting on the basis of craving. I was encouraging you to be more vegetarian or be more vegan because there's a huge amount of suffering and carbon emissions in the meat industry. Um, Connect with nature and seeing the universe as alive. So that was one of the things I was trying to really encourage you to move away from the view that the universe is fundamentally dead and see it as alive and as vibrant and as rich, you could say. And all that ties up with the liberations that we looked at. And do we feel a sense of freedom from doing these? So, and also then, to keep your home journal going as well. You might have kept up the gratitude journal as well. Okay, so why don't we go into the groups and we'll have about 12 minutes to discuss that, and then we'll come back, and if there's any questions, we can look at them, and then we'll look at technology. So, Amy, you can press the button whenever you're ready. Okay, you're all very welcome back. I hope you had a good little group there to discuss it. I don't go into the groups myself just because I talk enough on these nights, but I always find that on these kinds of things that the groups are often the best part of the night, actually getting to talk to other people. Please do feel free to comment in the chat box if you want to say anything, or indeed you can unmute yourself if you want to make a comment about how you got on or anything you talked about or how you got on during the week. Just leave a little bit of space for that. So let people finish their typing. Amy, how was your group? Do you want to say?
Yeah, the group was very good. We were having a chat about people going vegetarian.
Yeah.
And that one woman managed to go vegetarian all week.
Great.
And it was interesting as well. Just one of the women brought up about how when we're starting to go vegetarian or vegan, just to try and remember what we are doing, even if we do slip up, rather than putting all the emphasis on the day that you do slip up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was really interesting as well. What somebody brought up.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so I think Trina just echoed that. Try not to slip into all or nothing thinking and keep trying. Yeah, so you just have to, the famous saying from what is it? It's Beckett, I think, isn't it? You try and fail better next time. Try again, fail better next time. Yeah. Good. Any other comments from the groups?
We had a little bit of that as well. We were talking about. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah. I was going to ask you actually. Yeah.
We were talking about like veganism and vegetarianism.
Yeah.
One gentleman was saying that he's kind of like for 2 of his meals he's vegan, and then for the third it's kind of more he has meat. But like it's very difficult to go straight from meat eater to vegan. So things about that. It's about steps and progression.
Yes, totally. Totally, yeah.
And then we also had a thing around fires, around solid fires. We're coming into that time of year where they're so lovely, but also there's no getting around it, but they're bad for the environment.
Okay.
So kind of the ethics of that, like us wanting comfort versus the universe's health, or the earth's health.
Yeah. And in a way, that's what I was trying to communicate with the liberations, is that it's not just about self-denial. Like there can be a joy that comes from living really ethically as well.
Yeah.
But with fires, there is like there's a a kind of hierarchy. That's not the right word, but don't burn peat. Peat briquettes, absolute disaster environmentally. Then coal, don't burn coal, but timber is not so bad because it's a renewable.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Good. And the bogs are being cut up. I mean, they release huge amounts of carbon into the atmosphere as well. Then they're big carbon sinks that we're destroying with peat. And Jamie, do you want to say anything about your group, just to get the four?
We were talking about we were talking about gratitude, and we were kind of wondering about when we're doing our journal, are we being specific about the day? Are we thinking about general things? And there was just a bit of talk about what is better, and it was thought that, I think someone said that if they're having a bad day, to focus on the good little bits that they have, throughout the day. So
and it can be, I think gratitude can be very specific. It's usually good if it's quite specific. I think I would tend towards the more specific, because I think that brings you into more solid connection with people. But general gratitude is fine too. I think any gratitude is good. Yeah. Good. That all sounds really good. I'll assume that if there's no comments put in the chat or whatever, that there's no more questions. But if you have a question, here we go. Sam says, with regard to consumerism, much of it for me is to do with media. In another course, Neil Dara is leading another course in the DBC. Well, boredom is a necessary precursor for depth. But I'm going to be talking all about boredom now in a minute. I'm going to talk exactly what you're talking about there, Sam. So you're ahead of the game. That's good. So I'm going to be encouraging you all to be really bored in a few minutes. So we'll hopefully you won't find that too boring. Okay, good. And you can stick in more if anyone else has. And Sam, if I don't touch into all the points you make, I'll come back to it again. Okay, or remind me to come back. Yeah. Good. So I wanted to move on to technology, and I wanted to look a bit at technology before the break, and maybe it'd be nice to have breakout rooms again, actually, if we can have a chance to just chat about it. But so much of this course is the kind of what I'd like to do with this course is how does Buddhism really apply to the modern world and the problems of the modern world? And one of the big things about the modern world is just how much it changes and how quickly it's moving. And nowhere is this more visible than in technology, I think. So there's, our world has been completely transformed in the last X number of years by technology. It seems that even the pace of change seems to even be accelerating in many ways. And, when I was born, there was no internet. And who could imagine a world now without internet? And, I look at my nephews and nieces and they've never not known the internet. It's a very, very different world. And there's been so much good that has come out of technology. I mean, we're here talking to each other. Leaving aside whether the COVID problem was caused by technology or not, I don't really have a strong view on that. But certainly we're here together talking together about technology, thanks to an amazing platform called Zoom or whatever one you're using, Skype, Teams, all these amazing ways of connecting with each other and staying in touch. And our whole Sangha, our whole Buddhist community has gone online in the last while. And, it's not quite as good as being in person, I think. But at the same time, it's allowed people from all over Ireland and all over the world to connect with us and to connect with each other in a really amazing way. And we have so much access to the whole of the Buddhist tradition now online as well. We can read all kinds of texts, from Burmese Buddhist texts to Tibetan texts to modern Western thinkers and writers. So the technology and the internet and computers and phones have had such a positive effect in our lives. And of course, they've had a detrimental effect. So it's the more detrimental effect I want to talk about tonight. But the good is a given there. Don't think that I'm being a Luddite or anything like that. I really like my gadgets. I really like my technology as well. So so as well as the really positive side of things, there's also what one commentator has described as, our online behavior. He describes our online behavior as mindlessly pressing levers in the hope of receiving a nugget of social or intellectual nourishment. So there's a huge part of our relationship with online technology that is about that, mindlessly pressing levers in the hope of receiving a nugget of social or intellectual nourishment. Yeah. So much of the time there's a whole realm in Buddhism called the hungry ghosts, where you can be reborn as a hungry ghost, where you're just kind of moving from thing to thing, trying to get sustenance, but nothing you consume ever gives you enough sustenance to be happy, or you can't really take it in properly. And I mean, you can take that as literally as you want or not literally, but I think the internet, being online, is a bit like this. We just get these kind of sugary dopamine hits by getting a like on our social media feeds, and it feels good. That these tap into ways we have evolved of feeling good, and press those buttons in our brains. But it does lead to a dulling of the senses, and it does lead to problems for us as practitioners of the Dharma, as people who want to realize the truth of things. So, it's so easy, just jump onto, I was talking about this 2 weeks ago, and with consumerism, it's so easy to jump onto Amazon or eBay and start trolling, for just something to make us feel better, or, just so many ways in social media that we have of kind of just dully clicking from thing to thing, from article to article, from piece to piece. There's so much pornography available online, and what does that do to our senses? What does that do to our ability to relate to other human beings? The instant ability to contact any of our friends in the world, it's been a really, really good thing. But what does it feel like to always be available to people and always feel like we have to respond to the people who get in touch with us? Does emails and WhatsApps and Slack channels and things like this, whatever ones you use, do they lead to us being more mindful and careful about how we communicate or not? In the old days, you'd write letters, and sometimes you might read books of great men writing, great people rather, writing letters to each other. These really wonderfully scripted letters that are an unfolding of an experience. I remember being really struck by the I think it was Seamus Heaney and Ted Hughes' letters to each other in the Heaney exhibition in the Central Bank. Just looking at those, they had some of those letters preserved, and just the care and the love and the humor that comes across in those letters are so unlike my typical email that I tend to write these days. So we live in an age of kind of instant communication that has its strengths and its weaknesses. And last week I was talking about ecology, and I just think we might be better served by thinking of our minds as a form of an ecology, or of an ecosystem. So what are we pouring into our minds? What are we pouring into our minds? If you were to walk down to the local river and see someone pouring effluent in from these cans that had big skull and crossbones on the side, you'd be pretty upset about it. But we're probably many of us are probably taking that kind of stuff in every day on Twitter and YouTube and Instagram and so on, and what is that doing to us? And one of the things it does is that it leads to quite an unrestrained mind, a mind that's just very much goes into a sugary click cycle without any kind of restraint. And the Buddha himself said, not so much about the internet, obviously, but he said, I know of no thing more conducive to great harm than an unrestrained mind. I know of no single thing more conducive to great harm than an unrestrained mind, sorry. So, we get very compulsive and addictive online, I think. And the Buddha also said that in his time there were 32 kinds of useless speech. And Sangharakshita Bhante, the man who founded our community, I'll refer to him a few times again tonight, he commented in a talk in 1984 that there must be 32,000 kinds of useless speech by now. And that was like, 36 years ago. So it must be 320,000 useless types of useless speech by now. So we really have so many types of useless speech that we can get very compulsive about. So how many times do you check your Twitter, Facebook, Instagram feed a day, and is that useful speech? Do we put our phones on the table in front of us when we meet someone, and that has priority over the person we're meeting? And a lot of it is that it makes us unable to get below a kind of a surface choppiness of the mind, so we exist on a very surface level of our mind that's quite choppy. And so because it's very choppy, I think we tend to look for much more short-term sugary hits to take ourselves away from that. But really what we're talking about is trying to get into a much deeper sense of connection with ourselves and live in a way that's actually enriches us. So a really important question this week to ask ourselves in terms of technology, in terms of being online, in terms of social media, is, well, is my life enriched by this activity? Is my life enriched by this activity? And I've no doubt at all that aspects of social media and aspects of online can be very enriching, actually. I've no doubt about that whatsoever. And I have found it very enriching at times. But that is probably the minority of the time for me. I don't know what it's like for you as well, you know? So is it enriching? Are we compulsive? Another big area, and this isn't talked about so much, I think, is are we able to be out of contact with people on our phones and our technology? So, so many of us now, we have our phones beside our bed. We never turn them off. We never turn them on airline mode. So are we willing to be uncontactable for periods of time? I live with a guy, and often at the weekends, he just goes completely off his phone for the weekend, or maybe switches over to an old, I don't know exactly what model, but a Nokia 310 or something like that, you know? And you can't WhatsApp him or anything like that. You can't tell on WhatsApp when he's read the message and so on. And it can be quite infuriating, actually, but I quite admire it as well, you know, just going completely offline like that. I mean, in a way, we've gotten, I wonder if we've gotten into this space where we just feel like we have a right to contact anyone anytime we want, you know, and we wait for them to get back to us. And if they don't get back to us quickly enough, we can even get annoyed at them. So can we be completely offline? Can we, you know, typically in the Buddhist community, we go on retreats. And while we still run retreats, we have the winter retreat coming up, for example. You know, it will be online, so you won't be able to turn off your devices completely. But you go on a retreat and you're completely off your phone for the weekend. You turn it off, you put it in your bag. Not everyone obeys that. Sometimes you go for a walk and you see this disembodied rectangle of light floating in the darkness, you know. But ideally, you just turn it off, and it's such a relief for people to be offline, actually, to not be available, to be contacted. So can we have periods of time? Can we leave our phone at home when we go for a walk, for example? You know, can we turn off our phones for the night and not be contactable? Could we blaspheme even against this idea that we need to be always contactable? You know, if there's an emergency, you know, people will still get us in a few hours' time. You know what I mean? It's not a disaster. And I think the situation has gotten so bad that we probably do need to blaspheme a little bit about that, you know? The other thing as well is that people, you know, I think it's pretty widespread known fact that people just aren't sleeping as well anymore because they're getting all this really intense light from their phones, which is, you know, very blue light, very light. You know, it's almost like people are perpetually jet lagged these days and not sleeping as well because of being on their phones too late or on computers too late. So I know that like companies are trying to work against that, and you've got modes you can switch into and stuff. But you know, not sleeping well is a really, really serious problem for health as well. It can cause, you know, it can lead to health difficulties. So, you know, can we turn off our phones at 10 o'clock at night? You know, maybe you want to take a precept this week. A precept is kind of like a training guideline that you're going to try and follow. Could you take a precept this week that you're not going to be on your phone after 10:30 at night or an hour before you go to sleep? You know, or something like that, and just read a book instead. You know, that might be one of the best things you can do. If that's what you did this week, I'd actually be really happy, you know what I mean? Because I think that would make a real difference if people slept better and so on. So for me, one of the main places I get away from technology really fully is on retreat, is on like solitary retreats. I go away and I'm completely on my own. Usually I go down to a house in Kerry or somewhere like that, and I just turn off my phone basically, and I'm not contactable. I don't talk to anyone literally for the whole period of time I'm there, be it 2 weeks, be it I've done one for 5 weeks, I've done shorter ones for a weekend, or you know, like myself and Jyotika are ordained. We were both ordained in Guhyaloka retreat center in Spain, where we were completely cut off from the world for 4 months. And I did that last year as well, supporting an ordination retreat. And it was wonderful. And you go away, and the world's in a tiz about this and that. You come back, and the world's in a tiz in exactly the same way about this and that. It might be the same this and that, or it might be a different this and that, but you haven't really been missed in a way. And so can we be offline, actually? And can we just sit with the pain of not being able to reach for Facebook or Google or YouTube or Instagram or whatever it is? So in a way, we need to be a bit bored. And this is what Sam was quoting Yanadara. Sam was quoting Yanadara, and Yanadara was saying that boredom is a necessary precursor for depth. So I like that phrase, that we need boredom in some ways if we're going to go deeper. So there's an American cartoonist and essayist, Tim Kreider, if I'm pronouncing that right. I don't know much about him, but I was really struck by this quote. He says, "Idleness is not just a vacation and an indulgence or a vice. It is as indispensable to the brain as vitamin D is to the body. And deprived of it, we suffer a mental affliction as disfiguring as rickets. The space and quiet that idleness provides is a necessary condition for standing back from life and seeing it whole, for making unexpected connections and waiting for the wild summer lightning strikes of inspiration." So I really like that quote. The space and quiet that idleness provides is a necessary condition for standing back from life and seeing it whole, for making unexpected connections and waiting for the wild summer lightning strikes of inspiration. Whoop, my camera's gone all blurry. Let me just turn it off and on again. So I really like that idea of you have to stand back from life. You have to give yourself space to see life. And if you can, there's lightning strikes of inspiration that you can never predict. You can never really predict a lightning strike. But you will have those lightning strikes of inspiration if you give yourself the space to be bored, for something else to emerge true. Sangharakshita talks about boredom as well, and he says, when you're really bored, the best thing you can do is sit down and let yourself experience the boredom more fully. It may not be a deep or satisfying state, but at least you are not indulging in things with which you would normally cover up this kind of experience. Your real state of mind is more nakedly exposed, because for the time being there are no distractions. If you can stay with the feeling of boredom, you can feel your way through into something deeper, truer, and more spontaneous within yourself. And he goes on and talks about how, if you reach for, well, he said about the newspaper or ring someone, but that was back in the day. If you reach for your phone or whatever distraction you have, you'll undermine the chance to have that deeper experience of yourself. And to come back to, I was mentioning being enriched earlier. So I think by enriched, enrichment is, or there's a richness that emerges if you can stay with boredom and come through it. And you move into a state of feeling more happy, more calm, more present, more appreciative of the beauty around you, enjoying simple things more fully, and more calm. So that's what I kind of mean by enriched. And that's how you'd know if you were getting to something, you'd be happier with just a much more simple experience of, looking at the window, as I said before, or really tasting the tea you're drinking or the food you're eating or whatever it is. Yeah. So I hope all that makes sense so far. I mean, boredom is kind of like seen as the cardinal sin of modern times. We're not allowed to be bored. If you're bored, you're doing something wrong, or you're not engaging enough with what's on offer. So boredom is actually a really positive state from the point of view of, I don't know if the Buddha talked about boredom, but certainly modern Buddhist writers like Sangharakshita, and certainly I would agree with him that boredom is actually a really positive state if we can just stay with it. And it'll allow something much deeper and richer to emerge. So if you have any questions, obviously stick them in the chat. And then the last thing I want to say about boredom is I wanted to talk a bit about this teaching called the Bardo. So this is a really, really interesting teaching from the Tibetan tradition, Tibetan Buddhism. And really what it's about is about cherishing the spaces that emerge in our lives rather than just rushing to fill them in really quickly. Usually we rush from one thing to the next to the next. And if we have a bit of space, we'll tend to fill it in very quickly. And often the reasons we fill them in and we don't want to stop between activities is that we are in a bit of a rush, in a bit of an unpleasant state. And we would have to be really open to that if we did stop and feel our way in. I was talking about this last night in a different Buddhist group down in Killaloe, where I was visiting via Zoom. And a couple of people were saying, I think if I was to stop and really sit with myself, I'd really be terrified by what I'd have to face into, you know? So often we use busyness and running away from boredom as a way of not connecting with ourselves actually as well. And I think that's a large part of why we avoid boredom too. But anyway, so I wanted to talk about this word called Bardo. So I'll just share the screen again just so you can see how it's spelt and so on. So this is the word Bardo. So it's a Tibetan word, and it literally means in between state, or the translation I tend to like is a space, simply a space. Yeah. And it's in Tibetan Buddhism, it's seen as something that happens only for a very brief period of time. And it's a time of great opportunity. You can make great progress on the spiritual path in a bardo, in a space like this that opens up. But it's also a time of great peril. I think the best interpretation I have of peril is that it's great. It's very dangerous to miss these opportunities, but they also can be quite uncomfortable as well, as we'll come back to in a moment. Now, there's 6 traditional bardos, which I don't really want to go into very much here. I'll just mention them for completeness and just to whet your appetite in case you want to read a bit more about them. So there's the bardo of life. Life is seen as a space within which things happen. A dream is seen as a space within which things happen. You know, it happens for a very short time and then it evaporates again. And, you know, in the Eastern traditions, you can make great progress in dreams by learning to move into mindfulness and look for teachings in dreams. Meditation is a bardo. It's a space in which great change can happen. And then getting a bit more technical, and we won't go into this really, but at the moment of dying in Tibetan Buddhism is seen as an amazing space in which you can really break through into reality and see things more clearly. After you die, it's said in the Tibetan tradition that you go through this process where reality, everything falls away and you just meet reality nakedly without any obstructions. And you can gain enlightenment very quickly there if you can just really be open to reality. Most of us can't, unfortunately, so we go back and seek out something more comfortable, like a new life in a new body. And the bardo of taking rebirth. Now, I mean, I'm sure maybe I've made a mistake by putting these up because loads of people want to know about them more. But I really just want to focus more on the space. You know, the idea of the bardo as a space, a time of openness, a time of uncertainty, and often quite uncomfortable. So if you're very, very busy, and I was busy this afternoon. I went into shopping, and I had to go to the post office. And then I had to come home and cook for the guys in my house. And then I had to come here and prepare for the course. And, unfortunately, I didn't take much time actually this afternoon. I should have really. But it would be good to stop after each of those activities, just look out a window or catch your breath or feel how you're feeling in your body. And, just be really open in those spaces where one task has ended and the next task hasn't quite begun. And I often find that if you are like that, when you have 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 5 minutes, you reach for your phone or you reach for Netflix or you reach for something distracting rather than just stopping and staying in that space that you now have before the next activity happens. So that's why it's often uncomfortable, because we still have the habit of busyness there. So what I'd really encourage you to do is just try and create those spaces and be really, really open to them. And can you create bardos? Can you create spaces in your day where you just do nothing? Are you always completely hooked on social media such that you have to fill it up at all times? What would be the worst thing that would happen if you just stopped and sat with yourself for a few minutes maybe you're already doing this. That would be great. That's really, really good. And what would that look like, and how would you do it? One of the best things you can do for yourself, I think, is to do nothing for at least 10 minutes a day. Do nothing for at least 10 minutes a day, and see if that's something that you could do. There's been studies on this. There was a university challenge where they asked people to go 24 hours, just 24 hours, without using any online media. And 90% of people found it somewhat or very difficult to do. And around 84% found it really useful or very, very useful. And it gave them a much better relationship with online media. So I think it's really useful to leave this stuff, and then you can have a better relationship with this stuff, if you have time away from it. And also, it really highlighted, for almost everyone said that it highlighted just how personally reliant they had become on those means of well, I guess intoxication, communication, and so on. So it's very hard to hear the birds singing and appreciate the beauty of the world unless we can really put away our phones. And the average person checks their phone about 150 times a day, apparently. So that's rather shocking. I'm sure you could get an app to tell you how often you pick up and put down your phone each day. So that might be shocking and terrifying as well to look at. So are you able to do that? Are you able to be bored? Are you addicted, and so on? And Jyotica's just put a quote in there. We're both reading this book called The Master and His Emissary, which apparently I haven't quite started yet. I've flicked through it and I'm about to start reading it now. He said the concept of boredom and the experience of boredom only really emerged from the time of the Industrial Revolution. It seems to be symptomatic of our decisive disconnection with the natural world. Yeah. So, yeah. Very interesting. Okay, so I think I've kind of said all I want to say, right, really. Just stay in the boredom, sit with yourself. So maybe we could go back into groups for 10 minutes and chat about that, and they will have a break. And maybe in the groups, you might want to think, is there anything you want to do? So I just got so sick of social media this week and my compulsiveness around it. I'm already off Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook for the whole week. So you might want to join me for a week off those. I'm not off YouTube because I do actually watch some decent stuff on YouTube now and again, and it's not as compulsive. But so I'm not off that one. But I'm definitely off Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter for a full week. So you might want to join me in that. You might want to not use your phone after 10 o'clock. You might want to blaspheme against always being available to people and turn off your phone for periods of time. So maybe we could chat about that in the groups. So Amy, if, you're the host, or you give me back. So if you want to send us into the groups again for 10 minutes. So I think we're all back. One dropped out, it looks like. One's fallen out, maybe they'll come back. Okay, so you're very welcome back. I hope that was a good group session for you. Well, it's just gone on 8:10 now, so why don't we take a 10-minute break? If you have any questions you want to, or comments you want to put in the chat box, you can do so in the break as well, obviously. And we'll meet back here ready to go at 8:20, and we'll spend a bit of time then looking at conflict and how to respond to conflict in the world. Okay, see you in 10 minutes. Okay, I think people are coming back. Just check. Okay, good. Okay, so just to remind you all that the meditation course. This course is being run on a donation basis. So if you're in a position where you can give a donation to the Buddhist Centre, that would be really, really helpful. Amy, if you can share that link again, that would be great. You can see all of our events on dublinbuddhistcentre.org/online. So we have an end of year event coming up soon. We have a winter retreat. If you already know how to meditate with us, you can come on our winter retreat, which will be from the 27th of December to the 2nd of January online. And in January, we're planning this big meditation challenge as well, a 3-week or 2-week or 1 week. We're still working out the details, meditation challenge in conjunction with the London Buddhist Centre. So if you want to learn to meditate, you can join us there. If you already know to meditate, you can join us there. And the challenge is mainly to meditate every day for that period of time. And we'll be providing with all kinds of supports to do that. So that'll be up on that website in the next few days. And again, if you can give a donation to help us continue to do all these kinds of events, I consider the Dharma to be sanity in a crazy world, really. So if you want to support more sanity in a crazy world, I think that what we're doing is contributing to the sanity of the world. And we're not the only ones, obviously, but I think the Dharma is just a real medicine for the craziness of the modern world, and your money helps us offer the Dharma more fully to people in this world. So if you're in a position where you can give a donation, please do. It really helps us. We're almost entirely dependent upon donations at the moment. And you can click on the link there and then leave it open and come back to it at the end of the evening. Great. Thanks, Amy. That's great. Okay, it sounded like the groups went well from what I was getting one or two messages there. Maybe what we'll do at the end is I'll ask you if you have precepts to write them in the chat box as well. That would be good. But anyways, I hope those groups are good. It feels a shame to move on to the other topic now in some ways, but I'm just going to talk a bit about it anyway. And this is a bit perhaps less immediately relevant, but I think it's an important topic as well. So the topic is conflict, and I wanted to start with a story from the Buddha's time. So there was conflict in the Buddha's time. It was a very medieval society in the Buddha's time. And 5 years after he gained enlightenment, the Buddha gained enlightenment at around the age of 36, 2,500 years ago, roughly. He paid a visit to his hometown, which is Kapilavastu, which is it's India back then, but it would be modern day Nepal, just inside the border. And he found that a big dispute had arose between his clan, the Shakyans, and their neighbors. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but I think it's pronounced the Kalyans. And it was over access to water, as is very common in India, and indeed in Spain as well. When I've lived there, you get huge problems there with access to water as well. Each clan would draw from a particular river, and there was disagreement over who would get the most, because this year there was a shortage of water. And it led to conflict, and neither side would give ground, and it escalated into blows and bitterness and insults and provocations. And it even led to one side accusing the other of being descendant from destitute outcasts who lived in the hollows of trees like animals. So that was a very insulting thing to say, that your ancestors lived in the hollows of trees. So anyways, the Buddha was related to actually both the tribes. So the Shakyans, he was his father's side, and the Kalyans were his mother's side. And he went to the place where they were about to fight with each other and asked them to explain the source of the conflict. And actually, it was very difficult for them to explain the source of the conflict. Things had escalated so much that nobody was really clear anymore what the original conflict was about. But eventually after a time, he managed to tease it out. And he asked them, how much was water worth, and how much is the life of a warrior worth? So how much is water worth, and how much is the life of a warrior worth? And of course, they said water is water is worth very little, whereas the price of a warrior is beyond price, actually. And so he pointed out, the Buddha said, it is not fitting that because of a little water, you should destroy warriors who are beyond price. And they were silent, and they resolved their difficulties. So it's a story from the Buddha's life, but it's still very relevant. You have these clashes that take place between different groups of people. You have the same unwillingness to compromise. You have an escalation into acts of violence and beyond. And you also have belligerence and readiness to fight, even when you don't even remember what the fighting is about anymore. Yeah. And I'm sure you can see this interpersonally as well with people you fall out with. Sometimes you don't even remember what the original disargument was about, So, and thankfully, you can, it's like that back then, and it's very much the same these days, although the stakes have been raised with weaponry, with nuclear weapons, with all kinds of ways of killing each other, all kinds of ways of causing each other suffering at an individual level, but also at a international level, at a global level. But also we have the possibility of the voice of someone like the Buddha cutting through it all as well. And Sangharakshita has a quote that I wanted to read. I really like this quote. He's pointing out that we live in a global world where we have to think globally. We can no longer just think locally. So I'll just read this out. It makes it impossible for us to think merely in geopolitical terms. We also have to think of geoethical, geo-humanitarian, geophilanthropic terms. Since peace is indivisible, so the stark choice before us is either world peace or no peace, one world or no world, and we shall be able to achieve peace only if we realize that humanity too is indivisible, and if we consistently act on that realization. In other words, we shall be able to achieve peace only by regarding ourselves as citizens of the world, learning to think simply and solely in terms of what is good for the world or for humanity as a whole. So I'll go into his 6 points in a moment, which bring this out a bit more fully and explain what he said. But we need to go beyond identifying with any one side in conflict. The Buddha was saying that time, and Sangharakshita is saying here, we can't side with just one side. We need to go beyond. He says it. I'll say it a few minutes later. We need to go beyond a narrow kind of nationalism, which is different to a positive sense of patriotism. We need to identify with all of humanity if we're really going to go beyond conflict in the world. So again, it's hard to bring this down to the everyday level, but I think it is useful to bring out some kind of basic principles of what's going on here. And one of the main principles is not to polarize, be it interpersonally or be it at an international level. I have two friends at the moment who fell out there recently and were shouting at each other while I was present. And it's very unpleasant to see people polarize really strongly. They were Buddhists, I have to say, believe it or not. But there you go. And I remember even during the lockdown, I ended up shouting at one of my housemates as well at one point out of kind of annoyance. So it's just like over such a petty thing. I don't think I could even remember what the original thing was, just like the people arguing in the Buddhist time. It just kind of got out of hand. So the main thing is to avoid polarization. And I think states like nationalism can really encourage that kind of polarization that I'm talked about. In a very famous text, the Buddha, the Dhammapada, which I'll quote from a few times now, which means literally the way of truth, the Buddha said, "Not by hatred are hatreds ever pacified here in the world. They are pacified by love. This is the eternal law." So not by hatred are hatreds ever pacified here in the world. They are pacified by love. This is the eternal law. And it might be useful to ask yourself at a personal level, has doing more hatred ever solved, or more anger at someone ever solved your personal difficulties with that person? And in my experience, it's only when you've gone beyond yourself into some kind of state of greater love that conflicts tend to cease. And while I don't think we can expect countries to exhibit that kind of personal love, I think we have to get beyond polarization, at least, if we're going to solve things. And a lot of this polarization, just like with consumerism a couple of weeks ago, I was talking about how a necessary condition for consumerism is dissatisfaction. A lot of the time with politics, a necessary condition for politicians to gain power is fear. Yeah, so we can see this in America, where demagogues like Trump have talked about, we need to fear these people coming into our country who are going to destroy our way of life, and you see it in some thankfully small groups here in Ireland. Far right groups talk like as well. I think I can really recommend a very good documentary by an English documentary maker called Adam Curtis, if anyone has heard of him, called The Power of Nightmares. And he compares. It's a bit historical in terms of it's relating to, let's see, it would be the early noughties, which isn't that far ago. But he talks about how the neocons of America and Al Qaeda were frighteningly similar in how they whipped up fear of each other, and were utterly dependent upon each other for their existences. And what they needed from each of their peoples and their countries was to buy into the fear of the other in order to gather power. And if there hadn't been that fear of the other, they wouldn't have arisen, basically. So it's a 3-part documentary series on YouTube. I can send you the link. It's the one social media you can be allowed this week if you want to go off social media. But a very, very interesting documentary, I have to say. It really opened my eyes to just the kind of narratives that politicians use to make us fear each other. So we need to be very, very careful of language like that. And we need to be, like the Buddha, a voice of sanity and compassion in the world. So I want to look at, I want to move straight into Sangharakshita's 6 calls for action that kind of summarize these and distill these, and then I'll stop and we can have another breakout room if we want. Well, we will have another breakout room, sorry. So let me just get the PowerPoint here. Okay, so the Buddhist response. So this is all taken from an essay called Buddhism, World Peace and Nuclear War, which Sangharakshita gave back in, I think, the 80s, maybe the 70s. I think it was the 80s though. I'll look it up. I will send this to you. I'll send Adam Curtis's link in the email as well. But I'll send this lecture if you want to listen to it as well. But he was talking about the dangers of nuclear war at the time, which really hasn't gone away, by the way. But I think a lot of the principles that he's given there can be used still for all kinds of other conflicts. And again, I'm drawing on the order member called Akupa, who gave us those 5 liberations last week as well. So he talks about how we have these 6 things, these 6 calls for action. So the first one is pretty straightforward. We need to consistently act upon the realization that humanity is indivisible. Really see ourselves as citizens of the world and practicing metta with everyone we meet. I mean, it's very, very obvious in some ways. Metta, by the way, is the Buddhist word for loving kindness. So we do one of our core meditation practices is metta bhavana, cultivating loving kindness for ourselves and for everyone that we meet. Be they a friend, be they someone we feel neutral about, be they an enemy. So always act as if humanity is one, basically. The second one then is intensify our commitment to non-violence. And how we do that is with a more ardent and selfless love. So it's very, very idealistic, but we really need to work and come from a place of ardent and selfless love. Yeah. And really commit ourselves to non-violence. So violence here, this means, by the way, this is both at an individual level and also at a group level, be that group and bigger, a bunch of us or our country or whatever groups we're in. So giving up violence. Violence includes force, fraud, oppression, exploitation, intimidation, and so on. And you could say that non-violence finds expression in, an ardent and selfless love, like it's put there, openness, friendliness, gentleness in the very positive sense of that term, helpfulness, responsiveness, encouragement, sympathy, appreciation. All those kinds of qualities are expressions of non-violence. Yeah. Related to that then is the third one. So find non-violent ways of resolving disputes, either at an individual level or at a group level. Yeah, so it's find non-violent ways of resolving disputes. So can we resolve disputes without getting into camps where we turn our bunch of people against their bunch of people or against them? Can we move away from polarizing in that way? Or if indeed, if it is clear that one person is at fault, can we move away from just wanting to punish them for being wrong, and instead be much more concerned with restoring harmony and connection, and making and valuing them rather than just punishing them for being the source of the difficulty? Do we write off these people who do wrong by us? Do we cut off from them? Do we do wrong by them? And also, violent ways or ways that involve exploitation or force or fraud or oppression or intimidation or silencing people, they tend to store up further cycles of hatred and violence in the future. So you can see this historically. You can for example. God, there's so many. I was just thinking of this earlier today. There's so many examples of this. There's like, so much of the seeds of World War II were sown in the aftermath of World War I, and the way that Europe was divided up and countries were treated. So much of the seeds of conflicts around the world, like in Vietnam, were stored up, in Afghanistan and places like that are stored up in what went before, and individually as well. It will come back to bite us if we're not genuinely trying to resolve things in the spirit of a deep and selfless love, like the previous one said. Okay, the next one then is to rid ourselves of even the faintest vestige of nationalism. So by nationalism here, Sangharakshita means the kind of attitude where we should pursue our own interests at the expense of everyone else. Our nation is the best nation ever. Everyone else is awful. So it's different to a kind of a positive sense of pride in one's country, a rejoicing in one's country. It's less exclusion. That kind of thing is like nationalism is much more, we're great, everyone else is bad, or we have inherent qualities that make us superior, that kind of thing. I don't think it's a huge problem in Ireland. This idea of, well, in America, they call it American exceptionalism, and I think it causes all kinds of problems around the world. But again, being citizens of the world, being proud of ourselves as Irish or whatever your nationality is, but at the same time, not getting carried away with that. I mean, so much of what is us is just accident, really, like happenstance of where we happen to be born, So I don't think we can take much credit for it in some ways. But at the same time, we can appreciate what's good about it, The fifth one, like the Buddha in that conflict with the warring tribes, become a louder and clearer voice of sanity in the world. Yeah. Bring whatever pressure we can to the powers that be that we come in contact with, be it our communities, be it our elected representatives, be it conflicts we find ourselves in, and try not to solve conflict with more conflict, because that's not a clear voice of sanity. And also, I mean, just one thing that really struck me, like I said, from the Adam Curtis documentary is, keep asking questions like, why are we being told to fear or hate a certain type of person? I think this is a question that, when you look at very, very polarized situations like in America, why are you being told that you need to fear this person? Why are you being told that you need to hate this person? Why are we being told in Europe we need to fear immigrants, for example? Things like that. Why are we being told that we should only why should we only act in our own interests? What would it be like to be that person? Those kinds of questions are ways of becoming a louder and clearer voice of sanity in the world. And we need to ask these internally to ourselves, and we need to ask them externally when we're interacting with other people. How many times have you stood quiet when someone's disparaged a group of people and not said something? Yeah, I'm sure I don't need to give examples. And then the last one, this is the one that I think is really, well, they're all really interesting, but this is a particularly interesting one. Practice the Buddha's teachings more deeply with regard to birth, death, and craving. So this is the last one that Sangharakshita gives. Practice the Buddha's teachings more deeply with relation to birth, death, and craving. So what he means here is we should try and have a wisdom perspective on things. Try and have a sense of perspective, the Buddhist perspective on things, not just a worldly perspective. Hopefully you got those written down. I'm just going to stop the sharing now, if I can get my mouse working. So we're all going to die, for example. We are all going to die. It's the one thing we can be sure of. And to ignore this is to ignore a vital part of what it means to be alive. And Sangharakshita says in another place, it's one of my favorite sayings, death is a state of enforced meditation. Death is a state of enforced meditation. Now, you can take that two ways. The the Tibetan approach, or the more traditional Buddhist approach, would be that when you die, you do meet reality, and it is a state of meditative awareness that you need. But I think it's more, for me, what it means more at an everyday level is that when we reflect upon the fact that we're all going to die, difficulties that we have with people, with each other, things that really bother us just tend to fall away. Yeah, they're just not that important anymore. I don't know if you've ever been close to or had a bereavement, or had someone have a brush with death. I'm sure like for me, I remember with my dad's passing, it just felt like everything trivial was just so trivial. It felt like the veil between me and the other world, so to speak, speaking poetically, was much thinner, and everything was much more heightened. And the trivial things are much more trivial, and the meaningful things are much more meaningful. So when we can bring, and I knew as I could feel, in periods of time after my dad's death, moving back more into the triviality of things, even though you're also kind of getting on with your life again. And while it was a painful time, I was also sad to see it go, because you just get caught up again in the trivial, And if we could keep an awareness that we're all going to die, I don't mean in a morbid kind of way, but more in a kind of a way of like, if we really realize our friends are going to die, we'll really value them while we have them, So really valuing these people and the connections we have. And then it's not that important if we don't agree on things, or we fall out about things, and so on. So I think that's part for me of the Buddhist perspective that Sangharakshita is talking about, with regard to birth, death, and craving. But also, I think in terms of craving, I just think we need to remember that the world can't actually be perfected at times. That there'll always be suffering in the world. As long as there's greed, hatred, and delusion, there will be people doing stupid things. And actually, in a way, that takes the pressure off. I think it means like sometimes there's the tyranny of trying to make things perfect, and there'll always be people doing dumb things. And they'll often be us, actually. And I think it's much more easy to live in the world when we realize that when there's ignorance, when there's greed, hatred, delusion, there'll be stupid things done, there'll be craving, there'll be problems, and we just have to accept that as part of the Buddhism calls this samsara, the world of craving. And it's not that we don't stop to try and be better people in that world. It's not that we stop then making any effort, but I think it does take the pressure off us a bit, and we can be a bit more real then in the world when we just accept that Buddhist perspective. And if we can really see this, I think we'll live happily, and we'll live in harmony. So the Buddha talked a bit about that. He was commenting at one point. Again, I think it is in that Buddhist text called the Dhammapada. He talks about how it is possible to live really well in the world and live in harmony with the world and with each other. He's talking here about the spiritual community at its best. So I'll just finish with this quote, and then we'll look at a bit of the home practice for the week, and then we'll do breakout rooms. So he says, "Happy indeed we live, friendly amid the hateful. Among men who hate, we dwell free from hate. Happy indeed we live, healthy among the sick. Among men who are sick with craving, we dwell free from sickness. Happy indeed we live, content amid the greedy. Among men who are greedy, we dwell free from greed. Happy indeed we live, we for whom there is no attachment. Feeders on rapture shall we be, like the gods of brilliant light. Victory begets hatred, for the defeated experiences suffering. The tranquil one experiences happiness, giving up both victory and defeat." So can we give up victory and defeat and live happily? Okay, so I'll just share my suggestions for home practice, and then we'll go into groups again. So there's loads that could be done this week. You can read the notes again if you want. There's a lot more in the notes than I got around to this evening. One of the main things I want you to do is notice your online behaviors, or notice your relationship with technology, and see what is healthy and see what is unhealthy, and detoxify if you need to. So you might want to take on those precepts that I talked about. You might have already talked about this in your group. And really, really work to create more spaces or more bardos in your life this week. Do nothing for periods of time. Do nothing for a period each day. Pause after each activity and tune in with yourself. Do a little body scan or whatever. Things like that. Reflect upon and let go of grudges and conflicts you have, if you have any grudges or conflicts. Do more metta, the metta bhavana, if you know how to do that practice, the loving kindness practice. And maybe, recap and try and live out some or all of the 6 calls for action that I shared there from Sangharakshita. And if you're in a position to give a donation, please do so. That can be part of your home practice as well. So, sorry, let me just share that in the chat so that you can talk about it in the home practice. Sorry, no. So the formatting won't be great there, but at least you can read it. So maybe we can go back into the groups, Amy, for 10 minutes just to talk about what we want to do for the week, or discuss. It doesn't have to be just about what we're doing. Maybe you want to talk about anything you just heard there about conflict, or maybe you want to continue your discussion if it was cut short from the technology. So yeah, send us into the groups there, Amy, when you're ready. Good. Are we all back? I think we are. I think one person's had to leave. So Amy and I were just chatting there about, I made the foolish comment that we don't have much nationalism in Ireland. And of course, she reminded me of the whole Northern Ireland thing. It's very embarrassing to forget about that. But yeah. So we're talking about our habits and our views around that, and Brexit feeding into that as well. So that was quite interesting to chat about. Anyways, I hope you had a good discussion, and I hope you enjoyed having a bit more breakout rooms tonight. Do feel free, if you want, in the last minute or two, if you want to put anything into the chat box, one thing you want a training precept you want to do this week. I'm sure you, particularly around technology or something like that. It'd be nice to hear from a few people anyway, and then we'll just finish. I'll read these out as they come in. Unless you take something away from a course and to do, I always think you might as well not have done the course. So Jyotika is not going to read news in quotation marks while having breakfast. That's very good. Flight mode after 10 p.m. Very good, Greta. Thank you. Yeah, I'm sure hopefully a few people will be doing that. Let's wait for 3 more, and then if you have to, it's 9 o'clock now. So if you have to go, you have to go. But I'd love to hear from 1 or 2 more of you if that's possible. Good. More Bardo from Valerie. That's great. I like to have the precept of only watching things that will brighten my mind in some way. That's great, Jamie. Thank you. Leave phone in my bedroom for the day. That's great, Julian. Thanks. Best of luck with that. Good. And I see 1 or 2 people typing, so I'll just wait 1 more minute. Next week, we're going mute WhatsApp groups for a year. Oh, that's great. Good. Best of luck with that. I don't think Powers is your first name, is it? Anyways, thank you for that. That's very good. Great. Sam has gone high tech to solve his technical problems with synced his laptop and his phone screen time information to get an idea of my habits and reduce accordingly. That's very good. I think it's like one of those things that you used to do whenever you had a spoon of sugar in your tea. You'd put a spoon of sugar in a jug, in a jar, and you'd see how much sugar you'd eat over a week. You're probably doing the same now with technology, Anyways, let's leave it there. But next week we're not going to be analyzing world problems too much. I want to look at the Bodhisattva ideal, this teaching in Buddhism of living for the sake of all beings. So we're going to look at that next week, the 5th and final week of the course. So best of luck with your precepts, with your what you've taken on, and we'll see you next Wednesday.